Hello in the room. Can you hear me? Good, excellent. And I've unmuted myself online as well, so the people in the virtual room or then in their own respective rooms can also hear me as well. So welcome. My name is James Collinson. I am the immediate past chair of the IMechE's railway division, and it's one of my remaining duties to introduce Noel to you today, Noel Travers, who is now our current chair of the railway division, to give his chair address. Before I do that, I do need to do one or two notices, and then I will give you a short resume as to where Noel has come from, but I'm sure he'll also cover some of that as well as part of his address. So, firstly to say, we are, the audience is a combination of people online and the people in the room, so welcome to you, those of you who joined us online. Last time we looked, there was over 40 people already online, so great that we've got a good attendance. And for those of you in the room, sorry, those of you online, the people in the room, there's about 30 or so people here as well, so real good hybrid version of it. For those of you in the room, one or two notices in relation to your safety and well-being. If there is a fire alarm, the fire procedure is that we leave the building immediately via the nearest available exit, and our muster point is at the location known as the cockpit stairs. For those of you who aren't familiar where that is, as soon as you get out of the building, you take a left and you go along the footpath heading towards Buckingham Palace, but very soon you'll come across a set of stairs which then take you up in that direction, but that's actually where you meet and stay. So don't go up the stairs or find your way into any other locations. There's some nice pubs up there, but yeah, don't go there. We'll need to make sure that you get back in here safely. Please turn off your mobile phones and devices so that we don't have any interruptions, which would be much appreciated. And I shall make sure I've done that myself as well. Okay, I'm now going to introduce Noel. So I've been working with Noel for a number of years myself now, but I'm just perusing his biography and notice it's a career of 3 stages. Starting in 1988, where he joined British Rail as a management trainee, and he was sponsored through his mechanical engineering degree at Loughborough University. So very much kind of the first stage of his career was in the rail industry, starting at that level. He joined after he graduated proper in 1992 with his BEng from Loughborough, and then he went on to what a lot of people will recognise as the structured training programme for engineers entering in the railway at that time. Most of them depot-based, depot engineering management roles, before taking his first substantive role as traction roller stock engineer with Freightliner, following the privatisation of the railway in circa 1995. And during that period, his appetite for learning continued because he completed an MSc in Rail Systems Engineering from Sheffield University as well. So not content with his first level of learning, he carried on wanting to absorb more. But then in 2000, he left. He went to go and work in the banking, or the world of finance and banking. And it wasn't a little stay, it was a good 8 years. So he didn't just dabble with it, he took it on fairly seriously, working initially for GATX Capital, and then Royal Bank of Scotland, working on asset finance. However, whatever happened in those 8 years, he ended up being drawn back into the railway industry when he returned in 2008 to work with Bombardier Transportation at that time, taking on an initial role that was a sales director, but actually then graduating or progressing through to later on in 2014 becoming the interim managing director and chairman of Bombardier UK. Shortly after, in 2016, Noel joined Unipart Rail as managing director. So there's a theme here, a bit of a role becoming quite popular for Noel. And later on then in 2021, he joined the X-Rail Group as managing director, which is where he is now. So 3 stages: railway, banking, and then railway again. And I'm looking forward to hearing what that's all about as part of your chair address, as I now hand over to Noel for him to deliver it.
James has actually just saved me 30 minutes. He has just given my presentation. We'll start actually, firstly, by recognising the current situation. So, given the current period of mourning, I sought advice from the institution about whether or not this talk should actually go ahead this evening. And after they'd received feedback from the Royal Academy of Engineering, the decision was that it was business as usual and is as much as it could possibly be. However, we should recognise the period of mourning we're in, and the normal way for us to do that is to start with a minute of silence for our recently departed Queen. So if we could please give us a minute of silence both online and in the room. Thank you all. That was wonderfully observed in the room. I'd also like to take a moment to congratulate our new King, King Charles III, who I am told, or actually I read on an IMechE posting, is actually an honorary fellow of our great institution. So congratulations, King Charles. So as James has just said, those that don't know me, my name is Noel Travers. Oops. And I am currently employed as Managing Director of X-Rail Group Limited, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. When the time came for me to decide what I was going to give my address on, and what were the issues or opportunities in the industry and our profession that I wanted to address, I took a look back on my career, which, as you're about to hear, or in fact have just heard, has been a long and winding one. And I thought about the drivers for the various decisions I'd made when I came to my career, because a lot of my career was reacting to opportunity, but there was an awful lot of conscious decision making within it as well. During this period of consideration, I thought long and hard about the description that I've most used about myself when asked the questions, what do you do, or what's your background? On answering those questions with whatever my latest job title is, I usually followed up with, I'm an engineer, but not a very good one. Only slightly tongue-in-cheek. So what is it that makes me refer to myself, or think of myself, as not a very good engineer? I suppose, in my mind, what I would class as a good engineer, and I would imagine that most of the general public would class as a good engineer, was someone like Sir Nigel Gresley, designer of the iconic Mallard locomotive, or George Westinghouse, inventor of the original railway air brake system, or perhaps the most famous engineer of them all, George Stephenson, father of the railways and the first president of this wonderful institution. Now, I knew from very early in my career, in fact, prior to my career ever starting, that I didn't really fit this profile. Yet I somehow still made the choice of engineering as a profession. So why did I decide on engineering? It all goes back to my schooling, really. Having spent the early part of my secondary education in an excellent secondary school in Longridge near Preston, which had a vocational slant to the careers advice it was given, the best students in the class were encouraged to apply for an apprenticeship at BAE Systems, or British Aerospace as they're there now. Fortunately for me, I left before I needed to start considering this advice. My family returned to Northern Ireland when I was 14, and I was enrolled in a local grammar school in Derry. Interestingly, when I returned to my former school in Preston, in Longreach, and met one or two of my old colleagues. In fact, one particular colleague who was head and shoulders smarter than me. In fact, by far the smartest guy in the class. He got the prized role of an apprenticeship at BAE Systems. And some 25 years later, when we met, he actually spoke to me with a degree of disparagement that was, what on earth caused you to do so well in your career when all I am is a supervisor on a line at BAE Systems? And that's about education choice and career choice at that point in time. So in those days, when I returned to Derry, there was little or no industry in Derry, in and around Derry. And therefore the education was completely focused on getting as many students as possible into the tertiary education system, which was to create career opportunities for people away from Derry. It's by no surprise that you get so many Irish people in different parts of the world. We were all encouraged to leave as early as we could for opportunity. Like many of you, I would imagine, I excelled at maths and science in school and had an excellent careers advisor in my physics teacher, who encouraged me both to do engineering, which he believed would be an excellent career choice, and to apply for sponsorship opportunities to fund my way through university. The choice of engineering for someone who didn't see himself as a natural engineer probably doesn't make sense to many of you. However, I'm certain that there's quite a few of you who went through a similar thought process and ended up in this profession by default. I ended up with a choice of 3 sponsorship offers very luckily. One was from Michelin, the tyre manufacturer. One was from the Northern Irish government in a scheme to keep engineers in Northern Ireland. But I chose British Rail for reasons I'll explain shortly. And ended up as a British Rail engineering management trainee, sponsored through a mechanical engineering degree at Loughborough University. So here is a photograph, somewhat hazy and blurry, but that was the quality of cameras that we had back then, of my engineering management training cohort and I in our first week at the Railway Engineering School. You might recognise one or two who still have careers in the railway industry, here in the UK or overseas. To name check a few, this photo includes Darryl Simpson, who's worked with Network Rail now, Tim Gabb, who's with Freightliner now, Adrian Grigg, who works for Alstom now, Brian Spencer, Steve Allen, who's in New Zealand, Barry Davis, Ross Spicer, who retired after a very lucrative career in Australia, to name but a few. You can probably just make the side of my face out in that horrible turquoise jumper second on the right. I didn't have much taste in clothes in those days, but then again, none of us did by the looks of it. You also can't make out Andy Mellors, former chair here tonight, who quite luckily decided to take the photograph and not be in it, but he was also in it. Unfortunately, this photograph is some 30 years later at our reunion dinner. You can tell the difference and the impact that a life in the railway engineering has had on us. I'm not sure if you can spot any of the changes. So the British Rail Engineering Management Training Scheme really was excellent. It gave a very broad overview of the entire railway system, the different forms of engineering involved, and the potential roles for a mechanical engineer when you graduated. They were very clear up front that there were 2 paths for EMTs, as we were known. The technical path, which would take you into the Railway Technical Centre in Derby, or a regional technical office, where the designers and technical groups were generally based, or the management route, which would take you out into the world of maintenance depots. It will be no surprise to you, given what I've already said, that I chose the management route. And this option was why I chose the British Rail sponsorship rather than the others. The option to go into management, even at that stage, was appealing to me, and I knew I was always destined for a role in management rather than technical engineering. My training took me to many depots and offices over the 2 years, but by far the most enjoyable for me was my 6 months placement at Sellers Depot in South London. I doubt many people have been able to say that in their careers, where I experienced both running maintenance in the level 4 depot and heavy maintenance in the level 5 depot. My first role following training was as a technical assistant at Aylesbury Depot for Network South East, Thames and Chiltern, where I had my final training placement also. The depot was pretty new, as you can tell, and had been purpose-built for the new fleet of Class 165 network of turbo trains. Need to improve the graphics of that photograph. Interestingly, during my training program, I'd actually worked on the project to specify and procure these trains, and in fact was part of the team that awarded the manufacturing contract to Adtrans, as they were in those days. It was really interesting to be involved in both the procurement of a train and then its introduction into service and thereafter its maintenance. Although I did go completely against the old adage that you should never be involved in working in any asset that you had a role in buying. You've got absolutely nobody to blame thereafter. I was promoted relatively quickly into the role of production services engineer at the depot. And these were truly the only technical roles that I had in my career, or what I would class as truly technical roles in my career. That said, I will caveat it by saying that even in those technical roles, the unit spent most of their time in warranty, and therefore technical issues and failures were being primarily addressed by the manufacturer. My role was to ensure the maintenance could be undertaken in the depot with the correct manuals, tools, spares, etc., and managing the interface to the manufacturer for technical issues. It was in this job that I awarded Adtrans the first services contract for their first services contract for the supply of spares for their manufactured units, setting about a change in their commercial approach and their approach to the supply of new trains. Generally, their service contracts make up about 50% of their turnover in the UK and are by far the most profitable part of their turnover. So I moved from Aylesbury to Wembley Intercity Depot as a shift production manager. Again, Andy Mellors makes an appearance in this. You can see the SPM team, including Andy and another of my Railway Division board colleagues, Rebecca Selleck, who is current vice chair. The chap on the right has disappeared off to Australia, and I believe Brian in the middle is still working in the railway. In this role, from a technical perspective, you still have, particularly at a night shift, you still did have overall responsibility for the safety of any units that you released into service. And there were times that we were called to make an engineering judgment on whether a unit could go into service with a particular fault still on it. But you were very well advised by the old hands that were generally your supervisors and technical assistants. The role was so much more about getting the best out of your team's technical, cleaning, and even and unusually bed making. It was the home of the London Sleeper Service, and managing the bed making team was probably one of the greatest challenges that I've ever faced in my career. My next role took me to the British Railways Board to work on the Freightliner restructuring team, readying the freight operating company for its upcoming privatisation. In this role, we had responsibility for arranging the maintenance of a fleet of diesel and electric locomotives and wagons without owning any depots ourselves. To do this, we had to arrange subcontracting arrangements for the fleet, ensuring we were able to meet all safety case requirements as an operator, whilst ensuring the solution we created would be cost effective for the company. I remember winning the Young Members Presentation Award, and I do recall the head judge being a certain Mr. Cliff Perry, and I can confirm he's not open to bribery, no matter how hard I tried. And my presentation was actually on the pros and cons of subcontracted maintenance, something that is unheard of in an engineering environment, and actually something that was unheard of in those days. It was the first time that maintenance had really been subcontracted out in that way, and it's just normal state of play these days. Following privatisation, I joined Freightliner as assistant TNRS engineer and subsequently TNRS engineer. Freightliner, which was a management buy-in, operated in an incredibly competitive market for the movement of containers and was fairly cash-strapped. We have been allocated a pretty poor fleet of diesel locomotives. I chose this picture particularly because it does show the state, and this is after they've been repainted. These were the Class 47s. The electric locomotives, the Class 86s and Class 90s, were in much better condition, but still, particularly the 86s, were getting towards the end of their life. It was a real struggle on a daily basis to get enough diesel locomotives out into service to operate the service that we had. and we regularly had to hire locomotives off other operators just because of the unreliability of the unit. So we were an operator that couldn't afford to replace a fleet that was actually struggling to deliver the service that was required of it to run the business that we did. So we got into discussions with various parties and ended up talking to Brush Traction, who were looking at a way to develop a new product line, and came up with the idea of the Class 57. You need to work on these photographs, don't I? The Class 57 was a Class 47 locomotive and mechanical workings, but with an EMD, a US second-hand EMD 645 engine, and a alternator from a scrapped Class 56. It really was pulling together odds and sods to try and create the best possible product. Through significant value engineering, we reduced the cost of the upgrade from the initial quoted £600,000 down to about £350,000, which was significantly less than the £1 to £2 million that new locomotives were costing in those days. This single project did more than any other to get Freightliner through its early stages of operation at a time when it wasn't generating much cash, until it could afford to buy new locomotives from EMD. The technical brains in this project came very much from Brush Traction and my boss, Jim Hailstone, here today, who was the chief engineer for Freightliner. My role was about bringing the commercial and cost analysis behind to get the right outcome for the money that we had available to spend. The Class 57 was the first locomotive that taught me it was possible to enter an engine room of a locomotive with the engine running and not get oil sprayed all over your clothes, because you certainly couldn't do it in a Class 47. Jim and I also had the opportunity to procure brand new locos from General Motors Electromotive Division, visiting Illinois in the US and Ontario in Canada on a number of occasions. We did have the benefit of following closely behind EWS, who placed a very major order before us, and who also did most of the work in specifying and approving the locomotive for service in the UK. But we were at least able to specify, well, that's the 645 engine. We were at least able to specify the colour of the locomotive. Joking aside, we still had a lot of work to do in negotiating the deal with the EMD, and the approvals process was very much our responsibility. You couldn't subcontract the approvals process in those days. As safety case holder, you had to get approval for your asset class, regardless of the fact there was 250 of these already operating with another operator. So we did an awful lot of work getting that locomotive into service, and we very successfully did. So I'm about to embarrass him, but just a very quick word. Get the right photograph. So I started to become frustrated at Freightliner as I was looking to move into a commercial or management role with the general business. But the executive team there only seemed to want to put accountants into those positions. Jim will recall it well. This caused me to consider whether or not my career would progress when I was seen as an engineer in an engineering environment. I decided, in the face of the Freightliner management team reaction to us as engineers, that my career wouldn't progress there, and therefore I made the decision to leave Freightliner and indeed leave the engineering profession. As an aside, I was given one of my favourite pieces of management advice regarding monkeys on a tree. My managing director, an accountant, a turnaround specialist, and not a particularly nice man, decided I could do with some of his career's advice. The nature of this advice is such that in the current climate of mourning, I can't share it with you, but do ask me afterwards, and I would be happy to do so in a quieter environment. I learned an awful lot from that man, mostly that a good turnaround specialist does not make a good managing director of a growing business. It takes two completely different mindsets, and it didn't take very long for our shareholders, of which he was a major one, to decide that he wasn't the right man for the job, and he eventually exited the business. I'm going to talk a little bit now about Jim Hailstone, even though I don't have a photograph of him. One of the best things about the BR training scheme was the allocation of a mentor to each trainee engineer. I was lucky enough to be allocated to Jim. I learned a huge amount from Jim, including taking on a degree of what I would call his healthy skepticism, healthy cynicism, and some other people might call unhealthy cynicism. And following our time as mentor-mentee, he recruited me to join him on the Freightliner restructuring team at the BR board, and we both joined Freightliner thereafter. We made a formidable team, and to be honest, there was nothing we didn't think we could achieve. Jim probably contributed more to my engineering and business approach, in particular in his approach to risk and our ability to manage it, than any other individual has done before or since. The BR Engineering Mentor Scheme allowed young engineers to learn from experienced engineers and to start building a senior level network much more quickly than would have been possible otherwise. When it disappeared, it was a huge loss to the industry and its young engineers. The IMechE Mentor Scheme is a great scheme, but I'm not sure it delivers the industry-specific support over the longer term in the way the BR scheme did. As an aside, I did learn today for the first time that there is a rail delivery group mentor scheme, and I would be interested in learning at some stage whether or not it delivers the same benefit that the BR scheme did. So at that point in time, I joined an American leasing business called GATX Capital, who were looking to establish themselves in the UK and Europe. I joined as senior director and was subsequently promoted to vice president. I was initially responsible for overseeing the manufacture and delivery into service of the Voyager fleet for the leasing company Lombard, to whom GATX was providing what was known as a residual value guarantee. We were taking the risk on the value of the fleet at the end of the leasing period. As a result, we were critical in deciding whether design changes should be accommodated, and ensuring the fleet was as attractive to the market as it could be at the end of the lease period. This was my first experience of manufacturing new passenger trains and the challenges faced, in particular with an end client whose branding and image was of utmost importance, and therefore was keen to sign off every element of the design and not adverse to a design change even after designs had gone into manufacture. This role took me to Zurich in Switzerland, where we set up a European office to develop a European market as a result of the ultra-competitive nature of the UK market. This was my first international experience and my first purely commercial role. Following 9/11, as a result of the airline industry crisis and GATX Capital's significant exposure to this industry, GATX decided to move out of passenger and locomotive rail leasing in Europe into wagon operating leasing, which was my trigger to leave. The opportunity no longer excited me. I decided to join NatWest Bank in their asset finance business, Lombard, using structured financing solutions to fund rail and other transportation assets. I had full responsibility for developing a market in non-vanilla operating leases for transportation assets, closing deals for light rail and depots, amongst others. I also took on owner responsibility for the Voyager fleet, moving from that of residual value provider. And this was another completely commercial role where I had responsibility for all client interface and negotiations. The reality is this form of leasing had very little to do with the assets and their attractiveness. It was much more about using tax benefits to create cheap funding for the borrower. After a number of years in this role, I was approached by a headhunter who was representing Bombardier, looking for a sales and commercial director for their UK train building division. Whilst I had no intention of leaving banking at this point, I was intrigued at the thought of coming back into industry and decided to join. Bombardier was in a pretty difficult position in those days, having developed a reputation for not delivering on promises and admitting to being late at the last possible moment, which was a huge risk to us with the upcoming Thameslink bid, the biggest bid for trains and maintenance in recent history. Whilst it wasn't my responsibility to sort the operational issues out that were causing the delays, it was my responsibility for changing the culture regarding how we communicated with clients, especially around delivery performance. It was also my responsibility to mend relationship challenges with major clients in general, and the DFT in particular. I do remember one particular instance when we were delivering a fleet of trains to a brand new lessor who had, through a personal relationship, made me commit that we would not let them down in terms of delivery. But if we were, we would keep them informed. So I had it drummed into my project teams that we kept the client informed. On that basis, the client could help become part of the solution rather than just throwing bricks into the pond. I got a very disgruntled call from this lessor to say You told me you weren't going to be late, and I've just been called by your project team to say it's an 8 weeks delay in the project. What on earth's going on? At this stage, I wasn't even aware there'd been a delay. So we have got very good at telling the client and keeping them up to date. I went to see my project team, and they said, well, you told us to tell them when there was a delay. And I said, yeah, but how big is the actual delay? He said, well, it's 8 weeks. And I said, well, what are the mitigations? Oh, we've got mitigations in place. So what is the delay after the mitigations? We think it's about a week. Okay, so we need to temper the level of honesty that we're dealing with our clients at this point in time. Everything's a learning opportunity, isn't it? During this time, it was particularly pleasing to be involved in the development of the new product platform, the Aventra. The Aventra was the next stage in the development of commuter EMUs, lightweight, energy efficient, and high capacity. It was a huge move on from the Electrostars, which were excellent, reliable units, but based on a much older generation of technology. The specification, and to give due to an often criticised organisation, the specification that created the Aventra product was one that was wholly driven by the DFT. So it's right that we give credit to them. They were the people that drove the industry to make the technology step change that caused this new generation of EMUs. Interestingly, on that project, we ran a competition for employees to name the product, just to keep people involved, a bit of staff engagement. My favourite suggestion came from one of our European colleagues who thought that the most appropriate name was the floater. I'm not sure they understood the UK connotations, but I'm very glad that we settled on Aventra. We eventually lost the tender for Thameslink, in spite of having the highest scoring product from a technical perspective and the lowest capital cost. And I could run a separate presentation on this subject if non-disclosure agreements allowed me to do so. Unfortunately, they don't. It suffices to say that Bombardier brought its train building and service divisions much closer together on the back of this loss, and this led to the successful Crossrail bid. I spent my last 18 months at Bombardier as interim chairman and managing director of Bombardier UK, and really enjoyed my time running this 3,500 employee strong business, turning over in the region of 1.3 billion. I learnt a huge amount in this manufacturing and maintenance supply business, in some ways taking me full circle back to where I started, the maintenance depot. I had some wonderful experiences in this role, including hosting the daily politics show host Joe Coburn at the factory on budget day, where we watched the budget speech together, and she sought my understanding and perspective of what the Chancellor was actually saying in preparation for her show. It's clear she really had no understanding of what was being said, and needed it explained to her in a way that she could then go out on national TV and explain it. It was a very concerning time. I also learnt about the perils of live TV when I appeared live straight after the budget, and we had agreed what the first question she would tell to me as she emerged from underneath a train that was being manufactured on the shop floor. And as she walked up to me and I was running my predetermined answer over in my head, she lost her chain of thought and asked me a completely different question. I think I managed not to look surprised, and I think I made sense in my response, but it was quite a fun opportunity. I also had the pleasure of hosting the Prime Minister and the Chancellor at my time at Bombardier. And one of the clearest things I learned during that visit was just how tall the two of them were. I think the photograph shows it very well. I ended up with a very sore neck at the end of their visit. They launched the Midlands Economic Plan at the depot, and that was an indication of how we had turned the relationship around from one of antagonism with the department and politicians to one where they actually saw the value in fully supporting a UK manufacturing business in pursuing its goals. I also had the pleasure and somewhat dangerous activity of welcoming Boris Johnson to the factory. Now, Boris, and this was him just about to enter our cab shop where we fabricated the metal cab desks that were put into the trains. And as he turned around, wielding this cab desk, shouting to everyone that would listen, "Isn't UK manufacturing wonderful?" I managed to duck my head which given my height isn't a difficult thing to do, just in time before he decapitated me with the sharp metal ends to it. He also went on to scare the life out of me driving the train. He's the only, VIPs love to come to Derby and drive the trains on the test track. And he is the only individual, God bless him, who seemed oblivious to the ever-rising panic in the test track supervisor's voice as he was pleading with him to start braking as we were coming towards the end of the line. I don't think I've ever been so petrified in the cab of a train as I was with him. As I say, the test track was a brilliant opportunity for VIPs to come and witness what it was like to test a train. And pretty much they all took it up, including politicians, our new king, customers, old and new, and the future king, and actually the current king, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales as he was then. Charles was due to drive the train once or twice up and down the test track and then move on. But he was such a perfectionist around the driving, he insisted on continuing to drive the train back and forth until he was able to stop a subsurface train exactly in line with the driver stop boards that the London Underground drivers would do. He eventually managed it, but he was not for giving in until he actually did manage it. I left Bombardier and joined Unipart Rail as managing director. This is my first incursion into the infrastructure side of the railway. We started with 4 sites, both manufacturing and supplying spares, and then acquired 3 further businesses whilst I was there, who had products or services that were complementary to ours. After a couple of years in the role, I was also given the responsibility for the automotive manufacturing business of Unipart Group, making engines, engine manifolds, fuel rails for Jaguar and other tier 1 other OEMs. This was an interesting combination. I could see that the rail business could learn a huge amount from the engineering excellence that was required, absolutely required in the automotive industry. But more intriguingly, I could see that the automotive industry could learn a huge amount from the commerciality that was existing in the rail industry. I've never come across a culture within a supply stroke customer where the customer is in such an abusive position, and the control they have over their supply chain and the fear that the supply chain has means that the supply chain is commonly dominated by the tier 1 supplier, and whatever challenges the tier 1 had were passed down immediately onto the supply chain. I think I brought a degree of rationale in that thinking, and we changed the relationship that we had with the clients. They were very, very happy with us as a quality supplier, and they eventually came happy with us being able to make a little bit of money out of that supply as well. It was a really fabulous experience of operating in a completely different sector, automotive. And I discovered that a poor railway engineer, as I was then, actually could hold their own in that environment. I had also responsibility for a number of what I would class as technology businesses, Instrumentel and Part Signaling, who were acquisitions we made at Unipart, and METLAs, which was a joint venture with Rolls-Royce. Bringing these businesses together to form a Unipart technology group enabled me to create a completely different business culture of a high-tech startup within a large corporate environment. We encouraged an entrepreneurial culture which required a different view on risk and an accelerated decision-making process to ensure business growth was maximised. Very different to any other culture I've worked in. My career then took me on to my current role as Managing Director of X-Rail Group, an SME that operates in signalling and infrastructure. We maintain the signalling system on the Haramain high-speed line in Saudi Arabia and the Madrid-Valencia high-speed line in Spain. We're working hard to win further business overseas and primarily focusing overseas, even as a UK company, because the UK market is so challenging and difficult to get into, dominated by tier 1s. That said, we are doing our best to be a disruptor in this marketplace, and we make an incredible amount of noise for a business as small as ours. As an SME, it's really important that you fully understand the risks that you're taking. You can't take a large corporate view of risk, otherwise you never do any business. The benefit of being an SME is understanding your risk and actually backing yourself to manage it out of the business. And that's where we've been successful. The things that the business has achieved. We launched our operation in Saudi Arabia in 5 weeks from contract award. And that's recruiting a team of 100 people out there, making sure we had spare parts, vehicles, tools, and everything you'd need to look after a high-speed line. And also we launched our maintenance activity in Spain in 4 weeks. And 4 weeks starting on the day that Brexit occurred. So we became the first UK supplier to operate a contract in mainland Europe after Brexit, which we're quite proud. And to be fair, these are risks that I would never have advocated taking when I was at Bombardier or at Unipart Rail. Because you're an SME and you're that close to the ground floor to the operation, you can take that risk and you can back yourself to be able to manage it. And we did. The role, very, very different challenges to anything I experienced in a large corporate environment. But I have to say, it is incredibly enjoyable. And I'd encourage anybody that still has choices to make in their career, if the opportunity comes to be part of a management team in an SME, leap on it, because you'll get to do stuff that you won't get to do in any other part of corporate life. What was it that caused me to make the career decisions I did? And in particular, why did I feel the need to get out of engineering? Thinking back, it was clear I was very ambitious and was particularly keen to get into a general management position. I formed the view that I wouldn't get an opportunity to manage a business coming from an engineering position. I believe I needed to get into some form of financial role to be taken seriously, hence my move into banking and finance. I didn't believe engineers were getting a fair chance at the top jobs. Now, with hindsight, there were plenty of role model engineers in top jobs. For example, we had Andrew Chivers, who was Managing Director of C2C, One Anglia, and eventually National Express Rail. We had Adrian Shooter, who was Managing Director and later Chairman of Chiltern Railways. Cliff Perry, here tonight, who was Managing Director of Thameslink. You might recognise him, his hair is a little bit more white than it was in that photograph. And then AEA Technology. And we also had Richard Lockett, who had come from a depot engineering environment through a long career to end up as Head of Strategy at the European Rail Agency. At that time, as a profession, I don't remember us ever making a point that these leaders of industry were actually engineers. We didn't see them as engineers. We saw engineers as the people that did the designing, the people that did the maintenance, the people that solved the technical challenges that we had in the industry. We never made a thing that we actually had engineers in leadership positions. So this got me thinking about my initial statement. I'm an engineer, but not a very good one. But quite frankly, it's nonsense. I've been relatively successful in my career, and I'm convinced that I succeeded in each of my roles because I am an engineer, not in spite of it. My education, training, and early years in engineering roles gave me the base from which to build an understanding of the industry and how it operates. The naturally challenging mind that all engineers have helped me to continually learn from my experiences and apply that learning back into new roles. The problem-solving approach, the understanding of and ability to manage risk, the creative thinking, and of course the high levels of numeracy required to be an engineer also contribute to success in other roles. So as a profession, why are we not highlighting the many examples of engineers succeeding in general management or leadership roles, as much as we highlight those that undertake what I would class as real engineering roles? We should be highlighting the fact that the most senior rail policy advisor in Scotland is an engineer, Bill Reeve. We should be highlighting that the guy responsible for non-franchise operations in First Group and was previously MD of South West Railway, the largest passenger operator, is an engineer, Andy Mellors. We should be highlighting that the Managing Director of Grand Central is an engineer, Richard McLean. There are many, many others, and these are just used as an example. That is not to say that these people are any more important or better engineers or worse engineers than, for example, the senior academic engineers we have within the institution, such as Felix Schmidt, Emeritus Professor at the University of Birmingham, and the course director for my master's degree in Rail Systems Engineering from Sheffield, which I completed in the 1990s, and probably wouldn't have completed was it not for his continual prompting and pushing. And also Simon Inwicki, Professor of Railway Engineering at the University of Huddersfield, and chair of our wonderful Railway Challenge, of which you'll hear a little more later. As an aside, I would encourage any of you who haven't attended the Railway Challenge to find out when it is and go along as a spectator. It really is an excellent day out. I also wouldn't put these people or the leaders as any more important than those people that I would class as engineers in proper engineering role. People such as Bridget Andrew Skinner. Sorry, Bridget. Andrew Skinner, Head of Engineering at Great Western Railway, and Bridget Eickhoff, Principal Infrastructure Engineer at the Rail Safety and Standards Board, and also current trustee of the institution. Another engineer in a technical environment that I was particularly impressed with is a guy called Eddie Saranki, who's probably not known to many of you, but he was actually the developer of the Flex Eco Bogie, which single-handedly did more to lightweight the modern EMU than any other product. And actually, that design or design similar to it is what is currently operating on Crossrail and Thameslink. These were all excellent engineers doing different types of jobs and continuing to do different types of jobs in the industry. No one of them is a better engineer than the other. No one of them is a better leader than the other. They all have one key similarity in that they have the ability, and this is really what makes them successful in my view, the ability to explain complicated engineering issues to non-engineers. And that's not a skill that every engineer possesses. All these people, and many more like them, have been and continue to be a success in their chosen career because they are engineers and because of the skills being an engineer has given them. The key point that often passes by is that the diversity of opportunity that starting your profession as an engineer provides to you. Some people feel most at home covered in oil and grease or sitting behind a desk in a design office. Some people don't. We can accommodate, in fact, we absolutely need to accommodate all types of engineer in our profession. Highlighting this to people considering their career choices at whatever stage will increase the diversity of candidates that we have wanting to join us as a profession. And let's face it, have a look around the room. We're not exactly the most diverse of professions nor industries. If any, as important as attracting talent is continuing to highlight the opportunities engineering can provide, which will allow us to keep hold of talent. It might stop people leaving our profession in their early years to become an accountant, to become a banker, or indeed, like I did, to become a financier. That said, engineers that do leave the profession should be encouraged to come back. I'm in absolutely no doubt they will bring back a different set of skills, which will be used to further advance the cause of engineering in our industry. So in my year as Railway Division Chair, I will be encouraging the institution to do more to highlight the diversity of opportunity that exists within our profession. It's not just the job of the institution to do this, though. It is incumbent on all of us and our organisations to spread the message far and wide. Otherwise, our profession will continue to be dominated with people that look, sound, and think like we do. And we will lose talent to professions and sectors offering the sort of role that is attractive to as diverse a population as possible. Let's offer work placement opportunities for undergraduate engineers in more diverse areas. We don't need to put them into depots, workshops, or design offices, whilst this is an important part of any training. Why don't we put them into the businesses? Shadow the commercial people, shadow the sales people, shadow the senior leadership team, indicating to them that a career in engineering will open this career possibilities for them. So in returning to my original theme, I am an engineer, and whilst I might never have designed a train braking system, or a bogie, or a traction system, that does not make me a bad engineer. I, like many of my colleagues and predecessors, have contributed to the engineering process through my role as a leader with an engineering understanding who was able to create the organisational culture to allow my more technically gifted colleagues to succeed in designing that brake system, that bogie, or that traction system. And that, to me, truly is the essence of being an engineer. So I'd like to finish with a couple of adverts. The first one is the Railway Challenge that we mentioned earlier is about to undergo a significant infrastructure upgrade. And we are desperately calling out for some volunteers to come and help us moving some ballast around, laying some track, doing the proper or civils type of engineering. You know, the low end of engineering that we tend to class it. No offence, Bridget. It will be, there's 2 weekends coming up. The first weekend is the 24th and 25th of September. Second weekend is the 1st and 2nd of October, but we may put other weekends on as well. Interested in coming along? Then please do let somebody on the board know. We would welcome your effort and your muscles. And the second is an appeal as chair of the board for people to get more involved in the division, and in particular, more involved in running some of the committees that we have. We see a huge amount of talent coming into our regional centres, but we're not seeing that talent move from regional centres up to headquarters. We have a number of committees at headquarters that really could do with some support. So if you're interested in doing more, if you're a young member and want to join a committee as a member, not a young member committee, or if you're somewhat more old and sage and want to give us the benefit of your experience, then please do let us know. You'd be more than welcome to come and join us as a team. Thank you all very much for listening, and please do go easy on the technical questions.
Okay, we do have some time for some questions, so that's great. So those people who are in the room, so it'll be the usual raise your hand, your physical hand, and Noel, if you kind of choose your questionnaires. And what I'll do is I'll monitor the virtual chat room as well. So people, whilst you're not able to turn your microphones on or your cameras on, you can actually contribute by asking questions in the chat. So please do start sending them through, and I will inject them as appropriate. Okay, so first question from the room. Cliff.
No, as a professional, you seem to have sleepwalked into a massive area of risk in railway engineering, system design, and the management of software. Would you like to comment on that, number one? And secondly, is there anything we should be doing as an institution to make sure that we're better managing some of the things that not good?
It's a really pertinent question, because I think anybody that's connected with the industry knows that all of the new fleets, wonderful as they are, have had significant software issues with their introduction. One of the things we recognised when I was
just an admin thing, the people at home can't hear the question, so if you could just reflect on it as well, that'll also give you time to answer it. So the question was, I've
sleepwalked into an area of huge engineering risk in software introduction on new fleets, and how do we manage that? When I was at Bombardier, we tried to address this for the Crossrail project by creating what we call Train Zero, which was a mock-up of an entire train system, including operating door systems, including operating brake systems, all connected up in a test bed in the Derby factory. And whilst it was a great idea, what's clear, and there will be other people that are better qualified to talk about this than I, but it was clear that we didn't give enough time in the development phase to actually run through all those software issues. The second thing that's clear, and looking at what I would class as a successful train introduction, which was probably the IEP trains, or certainly the Javelin trains, the first Hitachi fleet of trains. The amount of time that they had to test their train on track before anyone went anywhere near an operating railway is a privilege that's not been given to any other manufacturer before or since. And I think we probably need to catch ourselves on a little bit, expecting these things to work out of the box. It could be great to do, and all the testing that we do and all the trials should make that more possible. But the reality is, until you've got them out rattling around this railway, you're not really going to find out how much the setup is up to the railway environment, which is actually what makes the Global Centre for Rail Engineering, the new test track in Wales, such a necessary thing for us as an industry in the UK. It's crazy that we, as an industry, have only had the 0.7 of a mile of test track in the Bombardier factory to run trains on, and a small test track in Old Dalby as well. So I don't think, I think there is a lot going on to improve the systems engineering, Cliff, but I don't think they're anywhere near it yet, and recent history has proven that to us. We need to get the trains out and tested before we subject the travelling passenger to them.
Any other questions from the room before I go to the virtual group? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Okay, so yes, I do have certainly one question that's come through from the 50 or so people who are online. So this is from Joachim Rowan. So it says, thank you very much for your interesting talk. I'm the lead sponsor for the Mechanical Graduate Training Scheme at TfL. Many of the TfL leadership have been, and indeed are, engineers. But what would be your advice for those starting out who are wanting to step from a technical leadership role to a wider business leadership role?
So I think, as I've demonstrated, you can be an engineer and push your career down the path of management as opposed to the technical engineering. We were very lucky in British Rail in that the depot environment was a perfect environment to do that. That was much less about, most early jobs were around engineering competence. It was much more about getting the best out of the teams of people that you employed. So it was easier for us in those days. But I would think, and the advice I would give people is not to jump out of engineering too soon. You need that basis of engineering capability to carry you forward in your career. But look for the opportunities that allow you to use your engineering skills and capability in a non-engineering environment. What are they? And make that incremental step out into the commercial world. If you make that straight jump, then you're cutting off your options.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Hopefully that answered that question. We have no more from the virtual room. Any more from the physical room? Richard Lockett. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just know. So quite a very interesting career. What can you think of one or two moments where you actually thought, this I've got this right. This is really satisfying. Well done me. And maybe
I think it might be a little bit of a nature of my character that, truth be told, I very rarely had those moments. I was always striving for what more, what next. Not in terms of I'm in a job and I want to move on. It was always about developing myself in a job. I really enjoyed the profile of the Bombardier job, but Bombardier was a difficult organisation to work in, so that had its downside as well. Banking and finance was very interesting. I was in Royal Bank of Scotland at the time that they made the calamitous decision to buy ABN AMRO, and I saw that company hemorrhage from the inside out in a way that became very public, and not very long thereafter. So throughout my career, there has been I've enjoyed what I've done all the way through. I don't think I've ever done a job that I disliked, and even the challenging jobs, there was always something to learn in them. But it was always a case of what can I take this learning on to next, and where can I develop myself best next? There was a question.
Yeah, no, interested the way you comparison, if you like, in your SME role as to what you've learned from the engineering side and what you've learned from the finance side, how you complement the two, and which is more important in running an SME, or are they both equally important?
I think the most challenging thing about being an SME, which I think any SME will tell you, is cash. So once you've solved your cash problems, if you ever solve your cash problems, you can then take a step back and look at everything else. The reality is that there is no engineering problem that cannot be turned into a finance problem. And I think it's understanding the risk, understanding the cost of that risk, that helps you to actually take a step back and decide the best solution for it. There is no problem, I think there's next to no problems that us as engineers, given infinite budgets and infinite time and capacity, can't solve. The question is, and this is the part that I don't always agree with every engineer, is what's good enough? And I don't think as a profession, we're always the best at deciding what's good enough, because our natural position is to take us to gilt edging the solution. And let's face it, the Class 57 was a perfect example of a product that if we wanted to gilt edge it, it would never have happened. We had a very, very limited budget, and we had to cut an awful lot of corners, no safety corners, but there was a lot of stuff that we would have liked to have done to that locomotive that we couldn't afford to do. So we had to find other ways. And that finance problem drove us to an engineering solution. So the two, in my view, can't be looked at independently. Every engineering problem can be turned into finance, and most finance problems can be solved with an engineering solution.
No, we had privatisation in the 1990s.
Yes.
Which was a major change for a lot of cash and change into the industry. We're in a situation now where that model is different. And we're in a situation where how is the industry going to be financed going forward?
So, first of all, I'm a great believer that privatisation was a huge success. But like all these things, it's a cycle. We wouldn't be where we are as an industry. And if those of you that had a lot more experience pre-privatisation than I had, I think most of you will look back and see that the advances that we were able to make in a privatised environment, it did release some of the chains that were holding us back as an industry. That said, we are unsustainable at the moment with our current cost base. I think the industry is, and there are various parts of the industry that have grown quite fat and quite inefficient over recent times. I'm not going to name that. You could probably all guess where they are. And I think as an industry, we have to get on top of some of the escalating costs. I think one of the biggest challenges we've had, and it's been trying to be addressed at the moment, is our escalating employee costs. And the continual pressure that the unions apply to us, and the fact that even in a privatised industrial environment, the strings were still being pulled by government as to whether or not we could allow a strike to happen, which would allow us to take on our unions maybe a lot earlier. And we've all seen the businesses that have attempted to do that, and the fact that they very quickly fell foul of our political lords and masters, who were getting a little bit of earache from the commuters that couldn't travel to them. Quite understandable, I know, and better to manage these things without industrial action, but there does come a point in time, particularly in an environment of spiralling costs, where we need to take the battle on. I think that what we need to secure now, and this is going to be difficult, is a longer term funding from the government. The government want to go to non-franchise operations, a little bit more like the TfL model, but with a little bit of revenue risk. And that's right, because what we've proven over recent times is the industry can't cope with a service shock, nor should it be expected to cope with a service shock like what COVID caused. So we do need public involvement, we do need public investment. But the public purse needs to set us a budget, no matter how challenging. We then need to go and cut our cloth to that. And we are going to face, over the coming months, a very, very significant spending review. It doesn't take a genius to look at the state of our public finances and know that there's some pretty challenging times coming out of it. Our job and our opportunity is to show that we can deliver in that climate.
One final question, as in, not from the chat, from the room. Okay. And I think there was a hand up. Yes.
David.
I was going to ask a similar question, so I'll vary it slightly. So in 30 years now, you've seen privatisation, you've seen factories full, you've seen factories empty, you've seen the role of the supply chain grow, from a lot of VR was self-delivered to supply chain delivery. You've been involved in infrastructure where there was relatively little supply chain involvement back in the days of VR. You also alluded in your speech to the changes in the way we develop and nurture our people. So around things like the sustainability of the industry, including supply chain, and around the sustainability of our people, as chair of the railway division, you've got an opportunity looking at GBR to actually, give them some thoughts and some recommendations for the future. Off the cuff, what would those be?
Look, I think there's a huge amount that our industry can do and wants to do things better. I think we have to create the environment where we allow that to happen. I think that there is an awful lot of wisdom spoken at smaller companies, and we, as GBR, should be looking to harness that where we can. That's not to say that the tier ones and the major suppliers aren't incredibly important. They are, because they're what keeps the industry running. But we need that freshness of thought to how we can do things differently if we're going to meet the challenges that we currently face. We can't carry on as is. We can't afford to carry on as is. The government won't fund us to carry on as is. And the last thing we want to see is service cutbacks, which is where they'll end up going if we can't afford the railway in its current form. So we need to create an environment where everybody has a voice and everybody's listened to, and we need to find a way of very quickly enabling people to deliver that voice, because it's okay listening to the voice, but if it then takes you 5 years to implement something, we're not going to be around for that. So it's about that culture of enabling innovation in products or in services that allow us to take cost out of the industry as quickly as possible and do it more efficiently and effectively.
That could be an exciting place for young engineers to work.
Absolutely will be. We won't do it without the engineers.
That's true.
Okay, so on behalf of the IMechE, Noel, I'd like to say thank you, and if everybody else in the room could say thank you very much. So I am going to call upon one of the people that you highlighted in your career, Andy Mellors, to do a vote of thanks. But before I do, I'll give him a chance to kind of come to the front. Noel did mention some future events for us, encouraging IMechE members and non-members to attend, which include the Railway Challenge. But there are a couple more that are a bit more immediate, because the next Railway Challenge, I think, is in June next year. So plenty of time to plan that. But we do have a couple of Railway Division events that are in the next week or so. In fact, the Depot's 2022 seminar is on the 21st of September. It is online, but it also includes an in-person depot visit to the depot in Gosforth. That's in the northeast, for those of you who aren't familiar with the geography there. So yes, please do go on to the IMechE near you and events page to be able to register for that. We also have the Seymour Tritton lecture on the 14th of November, which will be held here at Birdcage Walk, not necessarily in this room, in a similar format, being in person and hybrid. And then also at the very start of December, my word, it's nearly December, 1st and 2nd of December, we've got the Young Engineers and Apprentices Railway Seminar 2022, which will be held at Sheffield. So places around the country, in person and hybrid alike. So if I could just now invite Andy to share with us a vote of thanks.
Thank you, James.
Remember, I was nice to you. Go easy on me.
You were nice. So today, the 12th of September, coincidentally, is actually the 34th anniversary of Noel and I and 13 other sponsored students starting on the railway. And I did, during lockdown, have a rummage through some old boxes, and I didn't find any more embarrassing photos. But I did find our very first payslip.
Oh wow!
From 34 years ago, and we were given, after deductions, £81.56 a week.
I thought we were kings.
Yeah, we were king. But our careers have crossed on a number of occasions over those 34 years. And indeed have crossed with probably 2/3 of those 15 sponsored students that are still in the industry somewhere, even today, which I think is testament to the longevity of careers that you can have in the industry. And you've certainly shown us tonight just how varied those careers can be too. Richard Lockett asked about things that you were really proud of, and we've worked together as colleagues and in a customer supply relationship on a number of occasions over the years. And I think one of the things that I think we're both really proud of is what we were able to do in amongst the challenges of delayed electrification on the Great Western Main Line. We introduced a fleet of Bombardier Electrostars, the last Electrostars to be built.
Absolutely.
Off an established production line with really high levels of reliability. And I think a lot of that came from, you know, the willingness of our respective teams to actually work really closely to make sure that that happened and delivered ultimately a customer benefit and generate revenue for the industry. Thanks for reminding me about the bed makers at Wembley. I managed to erase that from my memory over the years. But a really fascinating insight into your career, and you said about the characteristics of a challenging mind, continual learning, problem solving, risk management, creative thinking and numeracy, and the ability to distill complex problems, engineering or otherwise, into very simple terms such that they can be understood, rationalised and solved. The variety of roles that you've undertaken, I think when you see it up there and you go through them, from
Still looking for something I'm good at. That's true.
technical, production, as a financier, manufacturing, logistics, service provision, SME, and with a hint of politics thrown in there as well. Maybe actually the title for Noel's talk should not have been not a good engineer, but maybe who else but an engineer. So thank you, Noel, for giving your talk tonight. Doing it for the first time in Birdcage Walk is quite brave. I think in recent years, most of us that have been the railway division chair have at least piloted it out in the one or two of the centres before doing it here. So that's really brave of you. Good luck with the rest of the tour. Best wishes for the rest of your year as railway division chair. And I hope you'll all join me in thanking Noel again in the usual way.
Thank you, Andy. For those of you online, that will now is the end of the sharing of this event. And for those of you in the room, please may I remind you that there is a drinks reception in the council room, which is one flight upstairs. Thank you very much. Okay. Well done.
Clearly my slides need a bit of work. Excellent. That's really good stuff.
What the hell are you doing with that?
I found it in a box.